Thanks for registering. There will be a recording sent out after the session for you to share around within your organization if you wish. We're also live on Facebook today, so we'll see how this works for us. First time we've used this piece of technology, actually, so it should be interesting. What we've done with Data443, and now that GDPR has officially become law, was look through some of the historical things we've been doing for the past 6 to 8 months or so, and also looking to see what's happening with our customers. One thing that's for sure is that there's definitely a lot more concern about data privacy in general, of course, never mind, the GDPR itself. And now there's a lot more sensitivity to not just, the financial penalties and risks, but also significantly, how it is as a business enabler for organizations to make sure that they have, their customers' privacy at heart, and also probably just as importantly that they're removing information that they no longer need, which could carry liability. One thing you'll find when you speak to your chief risk officer, your chief privacy officer, there is a growing concern that we're holding on to information that we either shouldn't or don't need to do anymore. And that information has significant risk for any organization. So as you're talking to your team, as you're talking to your organizations, definitely look through to see, what sort of, risk factors are being considered from the organization's perspective, and how that's being, processed, I guess, and managed. So what we're going to do for this presentation is go through the basics of what GDPR means from your perspective. I'm going to cover kind of both sides of the pond, from the European Union perspective and then also from the non-EU countries. This includes Canada and USA, of course, but also areas you wouldn't suspect like the Asia Pacific, Middle East, and other regions that historically probably would not have any European Union exposure. From there, we'll go into a few quick demos of ClassiDocs as well, just covering off some of the points about how it's managed and how we cover off some of the core requirements for ClassiDocs. We'll try and use a pointer for this as well so that we could highlight some of the key facts of the presentation. So what does the GDPR really say at the high level? Appropriate and technical organizational measures shall be taken against unauthorized, unlawful processing of personal data and against accidental loss of discretion. High level, you must have some sensitivity to data, that person's data, how it's managed and how it's protected. It is definitely a new and wide-ranging law, but other countries have had these in place for quite some time. Canada, for example, had the PIPEDA law that was introduced 5 or 6 years ago, I think. And even the UK itself had a data protection law on the books for quite some time. The GDPR ratified that law that the UK had and several other EU countries had into one singular law across the EU, and introduced timelines for responses and requirements on behalf of the data processors, defined a bunch of different areas of nomenclature or what words meant to certain scenarios, and then also introduced, of course, significant financial penalties if these laws and guidelines were broken. Data classification is really important in the scenario of GDPR. Specifically, GDPR calls it out as a major requirement, which is great for folks like us and anyone who's been in information security for quite some time. Certainly knows that data classification is the foundation for all of your security ecosystem and product sets. Simply put, if you don't know what stuff is and how it's classified as, then how are you supposed to protect it properly? We've seen data classification as a regulatory requirement for financial services for many, many years. Recently for healthcare in the US via the new law called the HIPAA, so the HIPAA law. And of course, military and defense government organizations have had data classification on the books for years and years and years. It's been around for hundreds of years from that perspective. And the concept of data classification really is as simple as someone saying this is what the sensitivity level is of this information. Sounds like an easy process. It's actually very difficult, especially when you're considering the amount of data that's in a corporation. Okay. The other thing you have to consider is personal data within the corporate enterprise treated the same as enterprise data? And this is something that's really important to really discern, because what GDPR does is it helps you identify specifically where a customer's information, which you would consider to be corporate information primarily, right? I had an invoice with this customer and we delivered goods for this customer. Now introduces the concept of the privacy of that information and how it's managed. So previously, you might have this information stored in your accounting system and never think twice about it. Now you've identified potentially some private information about this individual. It could be a name and address, it could be a phone number, it could be a government identifier, or it even could be preferences for your product that introduce certain privacy concerns. It could be settings within your offering that could introduce certain privacy issues. So you have to start thinking about the context of that person a lot more broadly and understanding specifically how you're treating that information and what the differences are for you. Okay? And this is where the true definition comes into place that really affects the processing of data on your behalf, however you're doing it, right? We are talking about things like racial origins, racial or ethnic origins, even political opinions, religious beliefs, any sort of physical mental health issues, even trade union membership, which has long been a sensitive issue in countries like Germany, now is exposed across the EU as a piece of PII. Criminal records and sexual orientation, these sort of things, of course, also do as well. So now when you start considering how you're offering information and services to your customers, any of this sort of information or information that links to that kind of information is considered PII. And then now you have a significant concern for GDPR. Okay. So sometimes when you have personal information and corporate information mixed in the same data set, which would be the very simple example of an accounting system that has information about, a transaction for a vendor, but maybe that transaction also includes, their Amazon shopping list, which might have privacy information built into it. So you have to really understand how that information is being classified. In some cases, we might need multiple different classification levels built into the product. We talked a lot about the articles of GDPR. There are 99 of them. It's a big piece of law. There are many components to it. I mainly boil it down to 3 or 4 specific areas. So area number 1 I consider for GDPR itself is the right to manage someone's own information at a high level, right? That might mean knowing what someone's using it for. That might mean removing my information from that company. It might mean just understanding what you have about me. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of areas where the law calls out that anyone can request from an organization to understand where their information is, how it's being used, who's got access to it, and the right to be removed from that. The other big piece of GDPR that some folks are talking about are the breach notification ramifications. So we're not going to talk too much about that today, but specifically when you have a breach or a consideration of a breach in a sort of data leak whatsoever, that could be anywhere from someone lost a laptop that had data on it to someone hacked a server and exported all of the customer records. There are significant and specific rules now, finally, for breach notification. And personally, I think it's a good thing. It gives everyone a set of rules to work on, as opposed to a hodgepodge of records and information that are out there and is not really managed properly. The third part of GDPR, which should have a concern for everyone on the call here as well, but is historically handled by another area, another department, is the whole marketing and communications area of GDPR. Not authoritative, but essentially you now must have full permission and consent from the receiver to receive information from you. And it's not just via email, it's also via letter mail and these sort of things as well. So you must have full consent from the individual. This is a pullover from the PIPED law in Canada as well, which has performed quite well from a consumer perspective. Marketers don't like it because they lose half their lists pretty quickly when people don't re-opt in. But at the end of the day, there is a full consent requirement within GDPR, and that is significantly impactful to a marketing program, but also fairly easy to handle. So, there are a fair amount of resources online about that. And if you're using any sort of marketing automation software, then there's a lot of stuff there. So what we're going to talk about is primarily the areas that our product ClassiDocs handles from a GDPR perspective. And I won't go through each one of these, but suffice it to say, we've covered 12 articles today. In the future, we'll have more capabilities as we build the product out to support not just GDPR, but other privacy services as well. And really build out the information set to make sure that organizations can process the information, but also respond to GDPR requests. Like I said, GDPR has some really defined timelines as to when, how, and elapsed time between requests must be. And most of the penalties and fines related to GDPR are related to your performance around those metrics. Okay, so if it's 30 days and you miss it by a day, there are significant financial ramifications that can be levied against you virtually right away. So from a high level, when we look at GDPR itself, and we're talking about the context of an organization that processes, that does a service for other organizations, really high level, we can talk about manufacturing, for example, very simple example. What are your requirements as the IT person, as the privacy person, towards the outside of the business, right? Service provider, you have customers, how do you provide services to them in response to GDPR? And what does that mean from a data perspective? Number one, you must have a capability to have discovery. This discovery capability, somewhat like you've heard before, you may have heard of the term called e-discovery. IT people, and especially IT marketing people, tend to mix terms quite a bit up. So I'll define what we consider to be certain terminologies, and you can agree or not, but our context is within the definitions I'll say here. So when we say discovery mechanisms, we're talking about the capability to look for specific pieces of information across the whole enterprise. Okay. That means I want to look for a last name, I want to look for hair color, I want to look for a political party name, I want to look for certain pieces of information that may be attached or considered to be PII for a person. E-discovery is a long-established field in IT. Some of you, I'm sure, have been exposed to it. My understanding of e-discovery is primarily it's used for FOI requests and other sort of legal cases. You might have an e-discovery request for, I want to hear everything about what they were saying about this person with an email. A very common use case is something like that, and certainly e-discovery products today can support some of the GDPR requirements, no doubt. We've taken a different approach and we've said, listen, email's fine and files are fine. Those are kind of simple things to search, even though most companies still struggle with doing that. We built out the ClassiDocs infrastructure to say we want to search and query all data estate within the infrastructure. So that means, emails and flat files, fine, but that also means every database you can think of, and the majority of cloud services that might be part of your offering, like Salesforce or QuickBooks, for example, all these other data estates that would have potentially information stored in them are in scope for GDPR. Okay, this is something that a lot of people consider. You know, they might say, I'm going to search this CRM database and that's all I'll ever need to find about that person. But when you start actually looking around within your environment, especially with hundreds or thousands of employees, you'll find data on laptops, you'll find personal data on data sticks, you'll find it on Dropbox, you'll see it in a CRM where it shouldn't be. You'll find information in a lot of locations that really shouldn't be there. So the discovery capability is really, really important. Which brings us into the requirement for a data catalog. GDPR really does call for a catalog or an inventory of data sets. They're asking or recommending, this capability to have a list of where data is and what it is. Very simply put, that's the requirement. To also use classification to help you drive that inventory and catalog. So this is where we fit in again, is that we'll say, listen, this database here has, information about customers, it's got some credit cards, that's fine. And also we found PII information. PII is personally identifiable information in these 4 tables. Did you know that? Okay. ClassiDocs will also drive reporting like, we scanned 6,000 laptops last night, 200 of them have confidential information on them. Maybe that's okay, maybe that's not, it's your decision. But also we found, in some cases, 38 files with some sort of PII piece of information on it. And we can do it generically and specifically, okay? So the other differentiator here that is really important, especially in the context of GDPR, a lot of vendors will come to you and say, buy our software and become GDPR compliant because we can find all the PII. And that is important to find PII generically, right? So when you find something that looks like a account number or an address, that is potentially PII, and you should be identifying and inventorying that. But also what you should be doing is being able to search for explicit PII or specific information about a person. And that's a really big requirement that you should have and GDPR calls for. On top of that, you need some sort of reporting and monitoring capability. This is really important to say, hey, I found PII about Jason, I've tagged it, I've identified it, I've secured it, and now ongoing, I need to monitor and report based on it. The one rule of GDPR is if, Jason's come to your organization and said, I want to be removed from all of your information, you must do it. That's one thing. That's a lot of work sometimes. Secondly, you must make sure I don't reappear in your data somewhere in your organization. Data has this nasty habit of reappearing in some cases. You may have removed it from all laptops on January 4th, but someone was on maternity leave for 3 months and came back and plugged the laptop back in and didn't get that command, and that information is still there, for example. You might have to do a restore from a backup somewhere and accidentally restore data that was supposed to have been deleted, as part of that restoration. So you really need the capability to monitor ongoing for these keywords and these PII pieces of information. What that also means is when you have a reporting capability, you should have some sort of security and audits capability. Simply put, you might want to say, hey, monitor for Jason because we certified he's been removed. If he reappears somewhere, we're going to kick off an audit governance capability and, move that file, encrypt the file, notify somebody, do something with it, all right? So, you don't want to just have a reporting capability. You want to actually do something when the condition happens. We support that fully. As part of the governance, you have this remediation orchestration capability, which like I talked about, but mainly the whole point here is when you're doing a GDPR response, the act and the law, and we're finding that the regulators really want to see an attempt for you to be accurate, valid, and complete as possible. So, we're now past May 25th. It's law. We're seeing that, some organizations are getting DSAR requests to find information. It hasn't passed 30 days yet, so we're not seeing any lawsuits or anything like that at this time because the dates haven't passed, of course. But what we're also starting to see is that most of legal counsel has been recommending to the organizations who are handling GDPR responses, for them to fully document what they're doing towards GDPR compliance. And part of that is really saying, listen, we're trying. We can only search 38% of our workstations today because of technology and budget issues, but we have a plan to finish that by the end of the year. So one recommendation to you when you're doing any sort of GDPR planning or actions towards GDPR compliance is document your current processes and your future project plans basically as complete as possible, because if there is a concern and the ICO or any sort of organizational body comes to you, legal counsel has always told the customers I'm talking to, and this is not legal advice, but the recommendations I've been hearing have been, the more you document your progress and your strategy, the more less painful it might be in the future. So really document this and make sure that you're capturing as much as possible around the process. All right, so we got into a lot of the requirements. What I'm going to show you are a couple things around the GDPR mechanism itself. Some involve our products, some involve partner products, some don't involve products at all. So the one big thing around GDPR specifically is this concept of a DSAR, or DSAR, we call it. And that stands for the Data Subject Access Request. This is the one that has a lot of people concerned. This is the scenario where, for example, you are an organization pretty well anywhere in the world now, and an EU citizen walks up to the organization and says, what do you have about me? How is it being used? And who's got access to it? Pretty simple questions when you consider it, and, pretty reasonable, I think, as well. When I go up to my bank, I want to know what they're using my information for, not just for my checking account and my credit card, but also I want to understand if they're marketing to me, if they're selling my information to anyone else, if they're using it for anything else. So it's a pretty reasonable request. The problem with the DSAR is that the organizations have generally just 30 days to respond. So when someone comes up to your office and says, I want to know everything about me that you have on site and how you're using it, who's using it, you have just 30 days to respond completely. And that is, hey, customer, we have you in 13 databases. We found you in 4,000 Excel spreadsheets. And in email, you're mentioned, 12 times. That sort of granularity is the expectation of a DSAR. It's very detailed. It must be very complete. And you only have 30 days. So that's hard enough for any organization to actually do. We spent a lot of time with UK customers specifically who've had the data protection law on the books for many years, and they do get, and they have gotten something called a SAR, which is the precursor to the GDPR DSAR. And then most privacy people I've been talking to have said that they respond as best they can and as timely as they can, but they know it's not complete and it's definitely not fast enough. So now GDPR put significant penalties on not responding within the time frame and not responding completely within the context of data. So just to be clear here, when a DSAR comes in, you must search all repositories of the business around data. We have one customer who's got a warehouse full of paper cards. They're actively scanning them in today into digital so they can at least search them. The data estate to be considered is all laptops, desktops, servers, cloud drives, cloud services like a Salesforce or something like that. Any sort of infrastructure components on the inside like databases, applications, all of those are in scope for DSAR. So pretty complex and pretty arduous. What we've done to help alleviate that is we've said, listen, a lot of these requests are essentially workflow oriented. Okay, so it's hey, I need to manage the I need to manage the capability to respond to requests. I need to also have the ability to conform to the requests as well, and also manage them ongoing throughout the infrastructure. So that's really a lot of workflow. And what we did is we partnered with a company called Process Maker. Process Maker is local to North Carolina. They've done a really good job on a workflow engine component. It's SaaS-based, it's on-prem based, it's got a lot of capabilities. The main point here is that we really wanted to have the capability to integrate the ClassiDocs to the workflow engine. The DSAR process is heavy on the workflow side. When I said, listen, someone could come up to you and ask for all the information that you've had and that are using about them, and you have 30 days to respond, that's only part of the DSAR process. So when you respond to that person, say, hey, we have you here, here, and here, and we're using it for this and this and this, that person has the choice to remove their record or correct their data with you. So if you consider the fact that you might have 300 places where that customer information is stored within your business, not unreasonable when you consider maybe you've been doing business with them for 10 years, you've been through 10 upgrades of Windows, and thousands of employees have cycled through the organization, and you've been through 5 CRM different platforms. You could potentially have this person's information in a lot of locations. How do you clean this up? How do you manage it? How do you remove it? How do you, ask the SharePoint person to remove the data, and how do you ask the CRM person to modify the information? You certainly can't do that automated. And that's one thing we saw earlier on, was that if we, say ClassiDocs found 400 results, that's nice, and that's great, and that's a start, but it's not the full use case for a DSAR. The full use case for DSAR is to summarize those results, give them to the requester, they can make the decisions about what to do, and then the business actions those decisions. So in this case with Process Maker, we've designed this DSAR process request framework with all the workflow components in there. So you can say, I want this person to receive the requests, I want this person to be the SharePoint team lead, and this person's going to be the CRM team lead. And then what you're doing with the workflow system is actually managing who responds to what and how it's being done. So for example, you might say, okay, the customer has requested to be removed from CRM. You assign that task to the CRM person. They do it, they respond back, and they say it's done, and then you respond back to the customer. So somewhat like a ticketing system. In a lot of cases, though, we're finding that there's a lot of work to be done in the middle. So for example, when a DSAR request comes in and you find data sets across the board, you're not going to send 300 listings to that end requester. Some of that is mixed data. Some of that is information that must be kept for audit purposes, for example. So in a lot of cases, someone needs to parse some of that information. And that's where the DSAR request portal comes into place. So significant requirements there. It's a major piece of work that a lot of folks are just starting to get into. We're finding that it's going to become more and more prevalent as people understand and appreciate their own rights around privacy. This is really important from the perspective of folks being able to understand where and how their data is being used. Okay. So what I'm going to demonstrate now is the GDPR Search Panel. This is a live demonstration of ClassiDocs today. What we have here is our established GDPR Search Panel. What we did with the infrastructure is we said data classification in general is really a very sophisticated search. And we've been doing that for a long time. We do that across a lot of platforms. There's a lot of great stuff there. What we've done is said, listen, we want to be able to discover and search on top of that across the infrastructure and return results. So what we said here is we wanted to have that capability, and anyone can enter a specific text pattern or a word or a address or anything else into the infrastructure and add it as a search query. Okay. That query goes out and searches across the infrastructure and brings up results. I'm just going to try and pull up my architecture slide here so I can show you what that looks like. So as that query is running, the architecture is actually executing against the back-end services in ClassiDocs. And what that really means is that it's actually executing against all of our, this is the slide I was looking for, sorry. It's executing against all of our endpoints. So as I was saying, we have great coverage across the infrastructure. Well, in this case, when I enter that search query, it's going against everything that's in scope here. So that is everything in Office 365. We're searching across any data at rest endpoint scanner. So really any desktop or server that this agent has been distributed to, we search everything on it. Every hard drive, every partition, and everything that's attached to it as well. So we're able to search any data stick or hard drive that's all actually plugged into it as well. Really important component there to cover everything in user land and everything plugged into user land. What we also have is, of course, the capability against servers. And that gives us everything access on the network, in a NAS or SAN as well, and of course, also in a cloud-based service as well. So we can scan and classify and do GDPR discovery against Dropbox, SharePoint, BoxNet, any kind of drive storage system that you might have, and pretty well anyone that you haven't thought of, because we use a very simple architecture to connect to them. So basically, anything that can map a drive in Windows, we can classify and search against. The other big thing here that we're doing as well is with that infrastructure, we're able to query all of these database stores, almost 400 now, as part of that data query. And all of it is controlled from a very simple backend that I'm showing you right now. Okay, let me get my browser back up so we can see what we're doing here. So now we're back to the panel. We enter the query. That query has been sent out to all agents that are registered within the system. In this case, we've got a couple systems running in the lab. And I put it in a query a little while ago looking for my last name specifically. Okay. So now what it's doing is it's pulling records that it's found my last name in a whole bunch of data sets. And what you're seeing here is results from several different workstations that are within the network. These are all my personal machines. And also specifically where what they've been classified as and what the content is and where it is physically. Okay. That goes against over 200 different file types. So if my last name was in a PDF, we'd find it. If my last name was in a text file somewhere, we'd find it. In an Excel spreadsheet, we'd find it. If it was in AutoCAD somewhere, we would find it as well. What's really important here is when you think back to the DSAR example, right? Let me just go back one here. When you think to the DSAR example, the query comes into the front, and now we're saying, send that query into ClassiDocs and then return results, okay? And these results are returned to the process maker workflow engine that says, here's what all the stuff we found. Like you can see here, this is just a few workstations. And of course, my name's kind of all over a lot of files, but in a lot of cases, you're going to have many, many results on a scan. And most folks, I think, are pretty surprised about how big and arduous the scan results are. What's also really important, and in this case, I'm taking this email address, we're doing a search for this one specifically. You'll see that we found it in a couple zip files and Excel files, and we also found it in the CRM database. So what we're also saying here is that you can do this query, and it'll be reported up against all data sets, all data files, and all database services, and report it up into this infrastructure. From this UI, people can do an export, save it to Excel, do their magic, do their reporting, do what they want to do. Or in the case of the workflow system, we recommend using a workflow engine to help summarize and roll up the tasks. Okay. Very detailed process there. And we feel it's really important, especially when you consider the concept of scale with thousands of workstations and servers on the network, hundreds of applications, all these sort of things. You can see very quickly how this DSAR request can get very arduous for you, especially when there's many of them coming in. All right, so we're going to cover classification quickly and understand why this is important. We talked about tagging your data and understanding what is where and who's got access to it. We take a little bit of a different approach. We don't just say, this looks like, a credit card number, so we're going to classify as confidential or sensitive. We're going to say, we're going to ask the users, the people who actually generate and use the data, to help confirm what is a classification, how it's classified, and is the system right, okay? The biggest thing you'll find in security tools today, and I think a lot of you will agree, is that the end user experience is generally horrible. And certainly the business itself cannot manage the security tool. Firewall rules, if you think about that, if you have experience with DLP, you'll see that, primarily it's only IT that manages the rules, and users have no input or feedback into the system. So what we do generally is manage the classification of the information, and then we bring up the information to a user to help correct and coach the system along. So what I'll show you right now is, the console right now for ClassiDocs running within the system we're running with today. So this is PowerPoint. It's very simple. It's very effective. You'll see that we have the classifications displayed right on the content itself. We can do watermarking, all that other sort of stuff you might expect. And also, if you really wanted to get the end user to help you classify better and understand what the system should be identifying as sensitive or non-sensitive, we can ask them to confirm for us. And the main point about asking them to confirm for us is we get two pieces of data out of it. Number one, if they agree with internal, then that helps to revalidate our rule for internal, right? Number two, if they say it's a partner email or partner document, they're actually going to give us a reason for the correction. Partner information set. Okay. And the main point for saying that and doing that is now that information has been sent up to the main ClassiDocs server and said, hey, administrator, hey, owner, hey, data steward, whoever you identified to run that classification. Joe at this time said this document was not internal, it was partner, and here's why. Okay, so we're starting to get the end users into the mix of correcting security tools. And it's very unique because it's primarily never been done before. But the main point for doing that is we really want this life cycle of classification to be continuous. Okay, we believe firmly that the classifications are not something that are done just once in a while. This is a continuous ongoing process within enterprise. The rules for classification and data sensitivity change all the time. Thus, classifications have to be done all the time as well. So we take a little bit different approach, and how this helps GDPR primarily is the fact that we're able to accurately and specifically find personally identifiable information, not just, oh, hey, here's a whole bunch of PII, but also, hey, here's Jason's PII, and really identify and narrow that down quickly. And that's really important for anything related to GDPR. Okay, as said, there's a very specific rule set and timeline associated with it, and it's really important to be able to bubble up those results as soon as possible. Okay. So what you see is ClassiDocs will be used for data discovery, reporting, monitoring, governance, and orchestration. So quite a bit of capabilities around the data side for all structured, unstructured, and data in flight. So data that's stored on a disk, stored on in a database system, flat files, and then data in use. So stuff here in Word and Excel and PowerPoint. We have these basic PII-based definitions. There's about 200 in the system now. We're adding more every day. And that's okay. That's a good start. We feel that it's more important, though, to have some machine learning and validations of the system by customer and related data points. So we may import the customer list from a CRM, for example, automatically. And we'll say, okay, anytime we see a name from the CRM in a database, that is PII, for example. Instead of we're guessing on a last name, we're actually saying this is specifically a last name. So we really take generic information and very specific information, and then bolt that on to having the end user confirm it for us as well, with machine learning reinforcement. The ML stuff is really neat. I'll spend other time on it, another presentation going through how that really works. So, really importantly now is that we'll speak about the machine learning stuff in a separate session. Suffice it to say, we have the capabilities to not just, do magic machine learning. The more important point about it is that the machine learning is actually guided by end users, and it's a really different approach to classification. So like I said, we're having the specific rules, we're having end users validate it, and we have a team lead or someone else confirm and make changes to the rules. And that's all outside of IT. So it's a completely self-contained infrastructure that IT can just operate and then manage from there. What you also see within the ClassiDocs framework is the ability to do an emergency search for information. This is really about, we really need to find this content very quickly. The performance numbers are pretty good. We can do a terabyte per day per machine. So if you're looking at petabytes, it's not really a lot of infrastructure to go through that whole environment for a full contained search. Forensics is very important as well. So the forensic search is the ability to say, I want to know what's happened in the past, and I want to understand how, where this document went, who's been using it, how it was saved, what the changes in classifications were, these sort of things. Okay. The last bit we have on the search side as well is the ability to do against social media and email. We're finding that these requirements are getting pretty specific in today's light of privacy and disclosures. So those platforms are also part of GDPR requirements, and also we have full capabilities for search there. Okay, what we're going to do is show you now some of the classification bits from the tool itself. So we've got the GDPR panel. We spent some time in there. That's all great. We have a lot of reporting and analytics that comes with the product, of course. So what you're seeing here is a very simple dashboard that's giving us, total files, how many files have not changed since the last classification, and how that's all reported. There's a lot of reporting and analytics in here for you to give you a listing of, how many files were placed where, what classifications they are, these sort of things as well. Another interesting tidbit on the data side here is we do have the capability to report at a high level all of the performance in the system and how we're able to manage and parse files. So you're seeing in some cases here is 500,000 files per hour was our throughput range in the labs. So it's interesting to note how that works. What you're also seeing here is the ability to report on the structured data stores. So remember I said we have the capability to search databases and understand what's physically in them. So here's a customer database, and in this table, in this column, we found confidential information. In this column, we found confidential information as well. So a full reporting and analytics on what is being found where. So that's really important to disclose and be able to search on. And then what we have here is something called what we call the Classy Stream. If you are a syslog fan, you will see that this looks much like a syslog, and we call it the syslog for classification. So in essence, what you're seeing here is every single file, where it is, what type of system it's on, what time, of course, how it was classified, and by whom. So you'll see in some cases that a user will disagree with a classification that the system computed, okay? And that's perfectly reasonable, and we fully expect that in the design. The main point here, though, is we've also got the capability to say, on top of, this file stored on this, in this hard drive, on this workstation or server, here are all the security permissions that go with it as well. Security permissions bring in some of the GDPR requirements for you to say, when the DSAR comes in and You're saying, Jason, we have this file about you, this Excel spreadsheet, and it's got access to by these people, and here's what their rights are. You're able to delineate those results and show them on an automatic fashion. Okay, so security permissions and the data classification is a pretty wide-ranging combination. You'll see companies like Varonis, for example, that will do the security permissions. They do a great job. They really don't have any classification capabilities, especially when you're talking about the end users. We're finding we're replacing 2 or 3 vendors solutions when we go into a customer, because we're covering, you know, the GDPR search, the e-discovery components you might already have, the full data classification stack, and what they consider data governance, which is essentially data security, data reporting. It's all covered in one box. It takes a fair amount of time to go through the full demo. What I do want to show you additionally is how the classification system works itself. This is specifically, again, how the classifications are managed by the business. You can create your own classifications as you see fit, summarize them, move them around, and everything else. The main point is you're going to give this panel to a team lead, a data discovery manager, someone who is responsible for GDPR even. We find that this interface is good for folks who have a good understanding of policy, your data security policy, for example, and they're able to understand that, okay, marketing is probably working with this kind of information, and that means it's sensitive. The main point is they are able to use the platform to manage directly specific keywords and what we call regular expression or regex patterns to identify information. And this is something, again, that's outside of the scope of IT. IT delivers the system. You know, we can deliver ClassiDocs by the cloud, so you can be up in an hour or two, very simple to deploy. And then what you're saying is, hey, you know, head of marketing or head of research lab, you guys know what your data looks like and how it should be classified. Here's your panel. You manage the data security of that, you know, of that file share, of that information. And that's a real mind shift, because those folks have always been responsible for data security and in most cases liable as well. So if this breach happens, yes, the CISO might get fired, but primarily whoever put that information, that file share, or, you know, copied it to that server will also be punished severely as well. And primarily they haven't had capability to manage their own, you know, destiny in that case. So we've really delegated that out to people like that. You have the capability to import a list of keywords, very simple to use. We find customers will import, you know, if it's a medical facility, they'll do a medical dictionary. Financial services will do a financial services dictionary term list. You can add hundreds or thousands of of words in here. The main point is, again, someone who's not an IT person can do this. Okay, adding a rule is as simple as clicking add, select your text pattern or regular expression, and I'm going to search for something in the UK phone number, and I'm going to add that to the code words, and off you go. Now the system will classify anything as confidential with the UK phone number in it. And that's all you have to do. Automatically, it's going out across that whole data estate we talked about in this slide here. It's automatically sent out all the queries to those platforms and is now actively classifying the systems. Okay. On the classification side, remember I said we would have end users controlling their own destiny, so to speak, and correcting the system. So what you're seeing here in this case is live information, actually, about how information is flowing throughout the infrastructure and being delivered, and how end users are saying what is correct, what is not correct. Okay, so you're seeing the ability to have the feedback right from end users displayed to the team lead or the manager. Then that person can make decisions about whether or not to make the policy changes or not. Okay, the last thing I'll show you, this wraps back into GDPR again as well. If we talk about my friend, this guy up here, we look at the access verification and right to erasure and rectification, right of access management. we deliver that policy right here within this panel here. So specifically what you can see is we have the ability to display a governance rule within the system and have the system actually trigger actions based on a condition. So the real simple way of saying that is I never want, let's pick on Hong Kong again. I never want the Hong Kong user group to ever have access to this GDPR subject query, me, okay? And if they ever do, I want to send an alert and probably run a script as well. So what we've just done right there is we've said, listen, if somehow this information is somehow put in this area that these people should not have access to, whether it's a classification of information to confidential or if it's a specific GDPR query, we're able to actually alert and do something about it. Okay, this is a really unique functionality. We don't see this really anywhere else, primarily because we're pulling in Active Directory identity, workstation and storage mechanism, of course, the classification or the GDPR query, and the flow of information throughout it. Because we're in the middle of all that information, we can make all these kinds of decisions and trigger a whole bunch of different things. Really unique functionality, and I think you'll see a lot more use cases come out throughout there as well. Okay, I'm just going to try and pull up some questions now. I see a raised hand. Okay, good, thank you. Got a question from Matt. Great. How's the classification for unstructured data done? So unstructured data, to be definition here, is really the data stored on a disk in files. That's primarily unstructured data. So that is your PDFs, your Word docs, all these sort of things. We deploy an agent on the endpoint if you wish. This could be a Windows workstation. We have Mac capability coming shortly. And we also have mobile capability coming shortly. But this agent can be deployed however you see fit. It can be run once on a login script. And it can also be run continuously as an agent on the back end of the infrastructure. The main point is that this agent, this scanner here, is speaking to the back end of ClassiDocs, whether it's in the cloud or on-premise for you, over simple SSL. And it's a very simple, easy architecture. There's no weird network ports or funky configurations you have to do to enable the solution. The agent runs in the background. We have a pile of security and operational controls for it. This allows you to say, I only want it to run on the weekends. I only want it to run at night. I only want it to run when the screensaver is running, a whole bunch of things like that. At the end of the day, that agent is able to scan everything on that endpoint. And that's really the big deal, is that we can scan the C drive, the D drive, anything that's plugged into that workstation, like I said, a USB stick, and also any cloud drives that may or may not have been approved by IT. If they have a private Google Drive they're using on the workstation for their work machine, you can tell the agent to scan everything that's attached, and we will find that endpoint and bring it through. So it's a really important thing that we're able to bring up and show. Okay, I'm just looking through the rest of the questions here, trying to find them. Where are we? Good. Another question we see fairly frequently is, how long does it take to deploy? We have two deployment models for ClassiDocs. One is a cloud services-based offering. This is something we can offer on a subscription basis or a quarterly renewal basis. We tend to host with our partners. So we will host the infrastructure with Amazon or Microsoft. We have a couple more hosting partners coming up shortly. In all those instances, we do the operations back end for ClassiDocs for you. So in essence, what we do is you sign up. Within an hour, we set up the infrastructure. you're getting a login, and we're going through the process of configuring it for you, and you're good to go. We find within 2 or 3 hours, basically, the basic configuration is done, and we're able to report on that information right away for you, and you can start deploying the agents from there. It's a very quick deployment model. All right, what about old or dark data? It's a good question. So if you look at these agents again, these two here, they have support for over 200 different file types. So that means we will open a Quattro Pro 1.0 file from 2002. I don't even know what year it is that would be from, but we're able to open these really old file types, basically, read them natively, classify them, and also do the GDPR discovery against it. Again, GDPR DSAR means all data within your data estate, even the stuff you haven't opened in years, or even maybe not even be able to open, is considered in scope. Okay, so it's really important that you have the capability to find and open all these old files. Would you sell ClassiDocs to a US company as a generic data protection solution? Interesting question. I think that if I understand it, would ClassiDocs be on its own a data protection solution? So what we're seeing is that, folks want to classify and protect the information. So we've got a lot of mechanisms in there to make sure that, when stuff shows up somewhere and where it shouldn't be, things are done. A lot of people are starting to say, I want to make sure that that doesn't happen in the first place, right? So we have some upcoming product announcemements in that arena, both partners and developed solutions in this space. You're on the mailing list now, which is great. We'll have information on that in the next little while. The main point with that is that the classification is driving the security tools. You'll see that most DLP vendors out there today have either acquired or built their own data classification solution. If you look at the CASB web proxy market, same idea. Symantec bought someone last year. Microsoft bought Secure Islands. Everyone is understanding that data classification is the core of a good security product. And we see no different with the rest of them as well. Okay, last question, and then we'll wrap up because I know we're running out of time. So if an employee has PII information on an external device, the USB drive, for example, what is the responsibility to the company under GDPR? Well, if that employee information is on a data stick, that's considered part of your data estate, which means it has to be in scope of your reporting and search. Legally, that's the definition, and most lawyers would agree with that as well, I think. We're seeing really there's no exclusions to what is considered corporate data. Essentially, if it's, if you look at your data security policies and your IT policies, essentially any piece of equipment that's used in part of your business, whether it's your own equipment, the employee's equipment, or the company's equipment, it's all considered to be in scope, right? So the same policy you would have for, web surfing restrictions and these sort of things would also be considered as part of GDPR PII search as well. So if it's being used anywhere in the business, then it's definitely part of it as well. All right, one more, and then we'll wrap it up. What about agents and will they eat memory and CPU? It's a great question. So these agents do consume some information, of course. They have to operate, right? What I'll show you is the dashboard that we have for the agents, just so you understand it's not too crazy. So this is a configuration for the agents themselves. We have a lot of capabilities about how, when, and what they do. You'll see we can exclude folders and all that great stuff as well. What's also really important, though, and for everyone considered, is we can control completely how much it consumes throughout the infrastructure. So this is something you can do on a per agent or globally as well. There's a lot of settings here, and be happy to show you in a full demo about how that works. All right, folks, I think that's the hour. I'm seeing people drop off already. Thank you very much for your time. We will be sending out the presentation deck itself and the recording very shortly. Thank you for attending, and I hope everyone's got a great day and stay safe out there. Thank you.